Week 21, Overview. America Divides and Italy Unites. We'll study the 4 years of President James Buchanan's term this week, from 1857 to 1861. It was a time of steadily mounting tension that ended with 7 southern states seceding from the Union in the last months of Buchanan's administration. Buchanan denounced these secessions as unlawful, but when given the chance to open military operations, he did nothing. Buchanan hoped that tempers would cool and the states would return to the Union voluntarily. He also wanted to leave the new president, Abraham Lincoln, as much political room to maneuver as he could. Slavery and secession dominate our week, but that isn't all we cover. Grammar level students will learn about the Pony Express as well as the Underground Railroad. Dialectic students will complete their 3-week studies of Hudson Taylor and Florence Nightingale. Rhetoric level students wrap up Hudson Taylor too, and also read about the unification of Italy. Let's start with Italy. It's ironic that the land which invented the idea of a republic should be so tardy in coming together. Italy united just as the American Republic was falling apart. If you did Tapestry last year, you'll remember how Germany and Italy had never really come together after the fall of Rome. Many tiny sovereign states were loosely joined by the so-called Holy Roman Empire, but geography, traditions, and politics conspired against centralization. The Alps kept them apart physically, while the chronic conflicts between popes and emperors kept the little states separate. As Britain, France, and Spain developed into large, unified nation-states, Germans and Italians remained divided. In the 19th century, however, things began to change. Napoleon's conquests shook up the old regimes. The Congress of Vienna redrew the map of Europe, giving control of most Italian lands to either Austria or the Pope. Some Italians resented their new rulers and began to dream of liberty and unity. Many of the Italian city-states had been caught up in the wave of revolutions of 1830 and 1848, but all of them lost any gains they had made, except for Sardinia. Sardinia hung on to its new constitution and tricolored flag, symbols of revolutionary nationalism all over Europe. That little island to the west of Italy belonged to Victor Emmanuel II, who also ruled a substantial piece of the Italian peninsula just north and east of Sardinia. King Victor Emmanuel had ambitions, however. When France and Britain began fighting Russia in the Crimea, he jumped in on their side. Victor Emmanuel's brilliant prime minister, Count Cavour, made an alliance with Emperor Napoleon III of France. Austria saw the writing on the wall and attacked Sardinia in order to protect its holding in the north of Italy. French and Italian troops fought back, driving the Austrians back. Soon all of northern Italy swore loyalty to King Victor Emmanuel of Sardinia. There's more to Italy than just the north, however. In the south, Giuseppe Garibaldi sailed to the island of Sicily to liberate it from foreign rule. Garibaldi was an immensely popular figure who had been a revolutionary since his youth. He had fought in Italy in the 1830s, fought for Uruguay's freedom in South America in the 1840s, fought in the revolutions of 1848, and sought refuge in New York City for a while in the 1850s. Back on his home soil in Italy, he conquered Sicily and then marched up the boot of Italy to Naples. Back on the island of Sardinia, Count Cavour began to worry that Garibaldi might go too far. If he attacked Rome, Catholic nations like France and Austria might retaliate. Cavour wanted a united Italy under King Victor Emmanuel, not a Republic of Italy under President Garibaldi. Cavour sent an army down through the regions still ruled by the Pope to join Garibaldi's forces, which were facing the army of Naples in the biggest battle Garibaldi ever fought. Garibaldi was grateful for Sardinia's help, and King Victor Emmanuel II himself led the triumphal entry into Naples. In 1861, the Italian people voted to unite under King Victor Emmanuel II. Not everything that we know of as Italy today was part of the new nation. Venice and the area around it was still under Austrian control, and Rome belonged to the Pope, who was backed by French forces. Italy would face a host of challenges as it tried to find its identity. Just 1 year later, Garibaldi's Republicans challenged the monarchy, and the new nation teetered on the brink of civil war. It was averted by the death of Count Cavour and the arrest of Garibaldi. There's a whole lot more to the story of Italy, and if your family is Italian, I encourage you to dig into it. We're going to transition to another country that was teetering on the brink of civil war, the United States of America. We're into the last administration before war breaks out, the presidency of James Buchanan, 15th President of the United States. Buchanan was one of those self-made men. Born in a log cabin in Pennsylvania, he studied law and built up a successful practice. He fell in love, but he quarreled with a sweetheart, who went off to Philadelphia. She died young, and he never got over her. He was the only president who never married. Buchanan had quite a career in politics before he became president. He was Secretary of State in 1845 when Polk annexed Texas. He helped negotiate the treaty that divided up the Oregon Country with Britain, and he helped write the secret Ostend Manifesto in 1854, which proposed that America buy Cuba from Spain or take it by force. The Democrats nominated Buchanan for president in 1856, partly because he'd been in London when the controversial Kansas-Nebraska Act was passed. It wasn't easy to find a candidate who could straddle the fence on slavery. Nowadays, we're all too familiar with the phrase, "I'm personally opposed to abortion, but I support a woman's right to choose." James Buchanan could have coined that phrase. He was personally opposed to slavery, but he insisted that the Constitution protected it and that the laws must be obeyed. Buchanan won the election of 1856, defeating Millard Fillmore on the Know-Nothing Party ticket and John C. Fremont. You may remember Fremont fighting in California during the Mexican War. He was the first candidate for the brand-new Republican Party, whose campaign slogan was "Free speech, free press, free soil, free men, Fremont, and victory." The Supreme Court tried to step in and end all the turmoil over slavery with the Dred Scott decision, which ruled once and for all that African slaves and their descendants could never be citizens of the United States. The court struck down the law that prohibited slavery in certain federal territories. This was only the second time the court ever struck down an act of Congress. The first was in Marbury v. Madison, and Thomas Jefferson's first term, which was the first case to even hold that the Supreme Court had such powers. Well, the Supreme Court's effort didn't work. To quote a modern pro-life bumper sticker, the Supreme Court isn't supreme, that is. Many Americans believed in a greater judge who administered a higher law. They believed God was calling them to disobey man-made laws that conflicted with that. They did have precedent for this. America had broken away from England by insisting that all men were created equal, and that any government that opposed that truth deserved to be altered or abolished. There were those who took those words seriously. Older children read about John Brown, a devout Christian who pictured himself in the role of an Old Testament prophet who was called to oppose slavery by any means, including violence. Brown attacked and killed slaveholders in Kansas in 1856, and he led an armed raid on the federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry, in what is now West Virginia, in 1859. Grammar-level children are learning about more nonviolent abolitionists this week as they study the Underground Railroad. The book, Follow the Drinking Gourd, tells how runaway slaves used the stars to head north. They called the Big Dipper the Drinking Gourd. Abolitionists used the terminology of the new railroads as code words for this freedom train. Conductors moved passengers from one station or depot to the next. The people who donated money to support the operation were called stockholders. 21st century Americans instinctively admire the people who made the Underground Railroad possible, but it's important for Christians to consider that it was illegal. According to the law, these slaves were stealing themselves from their masters, and anybody who helped them was their accomplice. The Fugitive Slave Act made it a federal crime to conceal a runaway slave. So, who was right? Both abolitionists and slave owners sincerely believed they were in the right. Both claimed the Declaration of Independence supported their position. Abolitionists insisted that all men were created equal. Southern slaveholders believed that the Declaration established a precedent for breaking away from any government that threatened their traditional rights. The Declaration says that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government. So, slaveholders and abolitionists were equally sure they were right. They say that two wrongs don't make a right. All too often, two competing rights make a wrong, and the greater the rights, the greater the wrong. With such fundamental rights in conflict, Buchanan's term was dominated by the gathering storm over slavery. The Republicans nominated Abraham Lincoln on an anti-slavery platform. He debated Stephen Douglas on the moral evils of slavery. Lincoln won every free state but New Jersey, which gave him an electoral college victory even though he only got 40% of the popular vote. The southern states reacted immediately, although Buchanan still had several months in office. South Carolina seceded in December 1860, and 6 more states followed suit. There were 8 more slave states that were still in the Union at this time, however. Union troops were holed up in Fort Sumter, in the harbor at Charleston, South Carolina. When Buchanan sent a steamship down to relieve them in January 1861, South Carolina fired on it. No blood was shed, So Buchanan decided not to retaliate. He thought a military response would only make things worse. Thus, the Civil War did not break out as such until after Lincoln was inaugurated in March 1861. Next week, we'll see how Confederate troops attacked Fort Sumter in April 1861, which triggered America's bloodiest war. Buchanan's effort to hold the Union together without war was doomed. But it was probably doomed long before he took office. America embedded a contradiction in her founding documents when she declared as a self-evident truth that all men were created equal in the Declaration of Independence, but then wrote a right to slaves into the Constitution. We'll spend the next 3 weeks dealing with the dreadful consequences of that contradiction.